Satoru Gojo is alive and he will join Yuji and his students to take on Sukuna in the greatest and most climactic battle in JJK history. And today we'll be talking about if it's actually good or bad that Gojo's back, and on top of that, 4 insane theories on how he may actually revive and resurrect in the very story itself, going over the Shoko and Utahime theory, the Ino resurrecting him from the afterlife theory, Gojo turning into a cursed object, and of course the Binding Vow 6 Eyes theory. There's a lot to talk about and some absolutely wild theories on how Gojo will come back in the story and his crazy impact for JJK's finale. So if you're a Gojo fan, you're definitely going to want to stick around all the way until the end for this one. So hey, be sure to leave a like, it helps out a ton, thank you. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for a ton of consistent and quality JJK content just like this. Less than 10% of people who actually watch my videos are subscribed, so if you love JJK, I promise you, you won't regret subscribing. And of course, thank you to the special grade members of the channel, it is always much appreciated. Alright, now before I actually get into the 4 crazy theories on how Gojo is actually going to come back, I think one of them may be true. You know, if Gojo's really coming back, one of those theories is going to be the one to actually be true. It's important to actually talk about, is it good for Gojo to come back into the story? Would it actually be good writing or bad writing? Is there even a point of Gojo coming back, since it does seem like Yuji's going to take the realm as the MC and he's about to barrage Sukuna with a bunch of black flashes by the end of JJK 256, and the narrator actually says that Itadori Yuji has awakened. Now there's actually good arguments for both sides, and in the past when Gojo actually died, I made a video saying why I think it would be bad writing for him to come back, and I talked about a lot of points, and some of them have already been addressed in the story. So one of the main points, and probably the biggest reason why I didn't want Gojo to come back, is simply because I did not want him to take away any shine or spotlight from the students. This was because I wanted each of the students to have their go at Sukuna. I wanted Yuta to fight him, Maki to fight him, Yuji to fight him. I wanted everyone to have a go, and of course Akari hasn't fought Sukuna, but at this point everyone who's strong and relevant has already fought Sukuna, and Akari doesn't have any crazy abilities. He's basically just another punch kick fighter. Granted, I won't lie, it'd be pretty cool to see how Akari would actually do against Malevolent Shrine, to see if the legends were true that he could walk through it and tank it. You know, maybe he can, maybe he can't, but at this point, realistically, everyone's had their go. I mean, even minor characters or very sudden and random characters such as Miguel and Kusakabe have had their go at Sukuna, so I'm more than content with Gojo actually coming back and assisting the students. And I'll touch upon this later, but depending on which theory comes true, it's very possible that Gojo will come back at a very weakened state. And this is important because if he does come back at a weakened state, he won't take away from Yuji or everyone else's spotlight, because it's not like he'll be the powerhouse carrying. If he does lose a 6 Eye or the 6 Eyes, both of them, and he comes back much weaker and he can only play a role of a support, then at least from that sort of point, it would be great for Yuji because his spotlight wouldn't be taken, and it's possible that he could have Gojo as nothing more than a supporting role, such as how Maki, Yuta, and Choso are right now for Yuji. And there's also the point that Gojo may actually come back for round 2, so if the students end up losing right here, right now, and they all had their go and even awakened Yuji has their go, then Gojo coming back for round 2 should be fine because everyone else has had their chance, and Gojo may come back to fight the merger, not even Sukuna, so in that way then he wouldn't have taken away from Yuji or anyone else's spotlight. Everyone would have gotten it. And there's also the argument that it would just be nice to have Gojo come back. JJK is quite a dark story. We lose many characters and it's far more than any other shonen, obviously not comparing it to seinen or other dark stories. You know, they also lose a lot of characters, so it's not unusual from that aspect, but for a shonen story it is quite odd and also quite depressing and dark, to such a point that people actually want characters to come back. And if Gojo actually does come back, it would be a bit hopeful and a bit light, and specifically only because it's JJK, I wouldn't mind. And do remember, resurrections can be written in a good way. It's just unfortunate that a lot of examples in shonen itself are usually bad examples of it, such as fake out deaths or poor resurrections which are badly executed. That doesn't mean all resurrections are bad. Gojo's revival can still be written in a good way depending on how Gege writes and handles it, so please do remember that it's not always resurrection and revival equals bad all the time. On the flip side, you can argue that this would greatly dampen chapter 236. This chapter was very special because we got to see Gojo in the afterlife, he was talking to his friends, and specifically Gojo said that he was very happy that he got to die in battle and he didn't die of old age and sickness, you know, something like that. He was very content with it, he was satisfied, he had a great fight, and he even got to talk to his friends in the afterlife. From Gojo's own point of view, it would almost be a spit in the face of Gojo saying all that just to bring him back anyway, because you're literally taking away what he wanted from himself. Because Gojo always felt alone, and finally, against that fight with Ryoma and Sukuna, he finally wasn't alone. He met someone who was actually stronger than him. And you can also argue that Gojo coming back would just dampen the chapter in general, because if you read that chapter with the knowledge of Gojo now being alive, it wouldn't hit as hard because you know, oh, Gojo's gonna come back, so his death chapter isn't gonna be as sad or dramatic. However, I will argue that if Gojo comes back weaker or just as strong as the students, this could also solve that sort of issue for Gojo. And if the students end up being really powerful, such as Yuji awakening right now, and we don't know how much stronger the rest of the students are gonna get, then they could actually be close to Gojo's level, mainly just Yuji, who we don't know where his power's gonna be EOS, so if Yuji actually ends up being being equal to Sukuna and Gojo, which you never know, you know, then Gojo wouldn't feel as alone if he did come back. He would have his dream fulfilled and he could finally see his dream fulfilled with his own eyes. His dream was he wanted to raise strong and intelligent allies, so if he could see that fulfilled in his own life, that would actually be very fulfilling for him. And Gojo's whole dilemma is that people don't actually see him for who he is. There is a very, very small amount of characters in the series that could see Gojo for who he is, these being Geto, Shoko, and it was actually said in the Q&A that Yaga also saw Gojo for who he was, so that's pretty cool. It seems like he was actually a father figure to Gojo, but Gojo coming back and being weaker, then people would stop seeing Gojo as the strongest or only the strong guy, and they can finally just see Gojo for who he is if he's not as strong as he was before. And maybe this can actually give Gojo more purpose and meaning to his life than just being the strongest. And it would actually challenge the way he even viewed the world, where it's not just about battles and strength anymore, and he can see his dream fulfilled, and he can just live a happy life with his friends. Now, whatever you think, if it's good or bad, because I've just presented you the pros and cons of Gojo coming back, that's completely up to you. In my own personal opinion, I've actually shifted. Obviously, given the 20 chapters and the students having their fights against Sukuna, I do believe that Gojo coming back could actually be a good thing, depending on how well Gege executes it and addresses it, again, with everything I touched upon before, and of a lot of the issues I have already having been solved. But of course, there is still some issues, such as it dampening chapter 236, but it could easily be made up for with some great writing on Gege's end. Now, what about the 4 crazy theories on Gojo's comeback? The first theory I want to touch upon is probably the simplest theory out of all of them, and that's the Utahime, Shoko, and Gakuganji resurrection. Now, we actually saw in a recent tribute video to Gojo, which was insane. It was an official tribute video, that the airport that Gojo was at was actually empty and nobody was there. And this could mean a plethora of things, such as Gojo getting on the plane, maybe he decides to go north, or maybe he decides to go south. We don't really know. However, what's interesting is that in the same preview, we actually got to see Gojo meet up with Shoko and Utahime for some reason. And this is pure copium, I'm not gonna lie, it probably was just a regular panel of them meeting up, but it's interesting how it was those two specifically, since we know that Shoko has the reverse curse technique capability of healing people. However, when you actually heal someone else with reverse curse technique, you're only at less than 50% of your own cursed energy output of healing. But if Utahime actually boosts the cursed energy output of Shoko, that could actually bring it to be high enough to actually bring Gojo back from the dead. And remember, Sukuna isn't aware of Utahime's ability to actually boost people's cursed energy output, because even Sukuna was surprised that Gojo fired off the hollow purple at such a high output. He only thought that, oh, he probably made a binding vow, which was true. He did sort of do the full chant to make it at maximum power, but he had no idea about Utahime's curse technique to boost people's output. That could actually be used to boost Shoko's output to be high enough to heal Gojo. Now we're gonna get a bit crazier. What if Gojo actually sacrificed his 6 eyes using a binding vow to bring him back from the death? And I actually made a video on it very recently, and pretty much the way this theory goes is that Gojo actually made a binding vow at the time of his death to give away his 6 eyes, or at least one of his 6 eyes, to come back later on and resurrect. And this parallels heavily to Hunter x Hunter, because in Hunter x Hunter, which I want to remind you, Gege is heavily based JJK's power system off Hunter x Hunter, and just generally, he has taken so many inspiration from Hunter x Hunter, from dialogues and even straight up paneling, which is awesome because Hunter x Hunter is great. He's a big fan of it. He has openly admitted that he's done it, and I really love that, seeing 2 of my favorite series kind of interacting in that way, and Gege paying homage to such a great story. I loved it. I really think that's awesome. But Hisoka actually had a moment where he thought, oh damn, I'm just gonna die, so he made a contract to actually resurrect himself when he died against Crollo, and that only took place a good time after the fight was over. The same thing could actually happen with Gojo, and it was actually said in Hunter x Hunter how Nen actually gets a lot stronger after death, called post-mortem Nen, and guess what? The exact same thing exists in JJK, where it's said by Higuruma and Kusakabe that cursed energy actually gets a lot stronger after death. So you could argue that the binding vow that Gojo is going to make by losing the 6th eye to resurrect himself would actually become far stronger after his death, because it's a post-mortem cursed energy binding vow, and it would make sense in terms of the sacrifice, because Gojo is essentially giving away his ability to control the Limitless by giving away the 6 eyes. Sukuna has said that even if Yuta's copied the Limitless, he wouldn't be able to use it because you need the 6 eyes to manipulate it. So Gojo giving away the 6 eyes would basically mean that he can no longer even use his curse technique. At the very least, he would only be able to use it to a very poor extent or in very minimal bursts, and it would make sense if he only has one 6 eye, so he wouldn't be able to use it as efficiently as he could, which would nerf him greatly and also tie beautifully with the way Sukuna actually beat him. Sukuna was only able to beat Gojo by making a binding vow to add more hand signs and chants to his world-ending slash to basically forever make it harder to use, but because of this binding vow, he's able to fire it off with only one hand. It would be very poetic if Sukuna used a binding vow to kill Gojo, and Gojo in the very same fight used a binding vow to resurrect. I think it'd be very cool. Now we're really gonna get crazy. The third theory is that Gojo turned himself into a cursed object. Now, of all the theories, I will admit this has the least amount of evidence, because all the other 3 actually have some decent evidence and have some backing. This one is purely speculation based, just because we don't know anything about cursed objects. I mean, we do know a lot about cursed objects, but we don't know the main thing. how do you actually turn into a cursed object? What is the whole process behind that? As far as we know, the only person who ever knew how to do this is either Jurov or someone from 2000 years ago who was able to turn Jurov into a cursed object. That's one of the two people, and of course the other person being Kenjaku. However, Sukuna has a very unique and gifted ability where he can basically copy or do anything that he's seen once. It's a ridiculously strong ability that he has. As long as it's not a curse technique or an inherited ability, he can straight up copy it. I mean, even in the case of inherited abilities, he was able to completely mimic the piercing blood with water. He literally copied the principles and recreated it, which is absolutely insane. So because of this, Sukuna was able to copy and now do the ability of turning yourself into a cursed object, as we literally saw him rip his finger off and he turned it into a cursed object and he fed it to Megumi. We don't know what the process was with him turning his own finger right in front of our eyes into a cursed object. I mean, he turned himself into a cursed object, but he still had some sort of consciousness. I don't know what was going on because he's able to force feed it to Megumi. Whatever the process is, could it be possible that Gojo could actually, at the brink of death, turn himself into a cursed object, and maybe he could actually feed it to Yuji later on if Yuji loses for round 2, or even Yuta to give Yuta the 6 eyes and limitless, something crazy like that. And we've seen Gojo on the brink of death can awaken abilities such as when he actually, awakened and he got reverse curse technique and straight up got reversal of curse technique and all this crazy stuff on the brink of death. So it wouldn't be out of the norm or anything new for Gojo if he does somehow turn himself into a cursed object, however that's done. And the final and craziest theory is that Ino will actually resurrect Gojo with his summoning curse technique. Now, I've made a video, one of the most popular videos on my channel, that Ino will actually resurrect Yuji, and I did say in the video that there's only a 1 to 3% chance. At the time it was only 1%, but now I've actually seen Ino be on the battlefield. That's boosted up to, I'd say, 2 to 3%. It's still a crazy theory, and there is a lot of explanation that goes into it. It would take a whole video to explain how Ino would even be able to do that, but to briefly break it down into bullet points, Ino has a summoning technique, and the granny actually implies that it's a similar technique to her own, which is a summoning technique. The granny can actually summon back the souls and the bodies of information of people in the afterlife, since Ino has a similar curse technique, which is a summoning curse technique, because he summons the auspicious beast power from another dimensional realm. However he does that, that's insane, kind of implying that spirits exist beside cursed spirits, just normal spirits. But back on topic, if Ino somehow figured it out over the time skip, because he did say he had something to tell Shoko and Gojo about Nanami, could it be possible that he could actually try and resurrect Gojo by summoning his soul's information back to the body and resurrect him that way? I've done a very abridged version of the theory, but there is a lot more evidence to it, and it does actually make a lot of sense. However, the only issue is Gege actually pulling off such an idea. He could do if he wanted to. It makes complete sense within the story, but it's just a matter of, would Gege actually do that? And we did see Ino isn't on the battlefield right now, so it's possible that Ui actually teleported him back when he was thrown out of the window, and maybe he actually goes to Gojo's corpse and says, wait, let me at least try and resurrect him. I'm actually banking on this theory for Yuji when Yuji actually goes on the brink of death, but hey, if it happens for Gojo, that would be pretty cool too. But if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, it helps out a ton. Thank you. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for a ton of consistent and quality JJK content just like this. Like I said in the beginning, less than 10% of people actually watch my videos are subscribed. So if you love JJK, I assure you, you won't regret subscribing. And of course, thank you to all the channel members as well. It is always much appreciated. Thank you very much. But that's all from me. Have a great day and take care.